Given the conversation that we had yesterday in regards to all the revenue funds, you should have received through your email so an update from the tobacco settlement for the Key Fund. So please check your email for that document. Also, you should have received information that was submitted by Sean McBurney, the Senior Manager of State Outreach from America 250 Foundation, regarding the semi-quincentennial information. That bill was House Bill 2353 that we heard last week. So, committee, are there any bill introductions this morning? All right, not seeing any. How the process is going to work this morning in regards to an update on the Board of Regents and higher education is first, I'm going to invite the President of the Board of Regents, Blake Flanders, to address the committee. He'll speak for about 15 to 20 minutes. And then we'll have all the individual university presidents and the chancellor of the University of Kansas address the committee, and they'll speak anywhere from 5 to 8 minutes in regards to how they have proceeded during the pandemic and how each university has handled classroom instruction due to COVID-19. So right now I will go ahead and invite Blake Flanders to address the committee, and he is the President of the Board of Regents. Welcome to committee.
Well, good morning, Chairman Waymaster and members of the committee. We appreciate the opportunity to be invited and come speak today and really work towards solutions on how we can help our Kansas families, businesses, and increase prosperity for all of Kansas. I thought it might be helpful, and I will just go through a quick timeline of where we were. This is actually our anniversary day, March 11th, when the Board of Regents met last year and went to a remote learning format. But in early January of 2020, as you remember, the reports began to emerge about a coronavirus outbreak in China. During the next few months, the virus obviously spread across the world, and it forced our system to take steps to safeguard the health and safety of students and our employees. And again, last year on this date, the Board of Regents met and voted to give state university CEOs some flexibility to make changes to their academic calendars in response to COVID-19. Our situation was that we were currently on spring break. Our communities and our community hospitals were all short on PPE, as you remember. There wasn't near the information known about the virus and which groups were at risk in terms of that. And our students were scattered literally all over the world for spring break. So we knew if we allow that those students come back into those communities, we put our communities and our state at risk. Soon, all of the state universities suspended in-person instruction and moved to more of a remote learning format. And again, at that time, there were so many unknowns related to the virus. I don't know if you remember, but we were washing groceries before you brought them in the house. We were getting our mail with gloves on, and we really didn't know exactly how the virus spread. We have a lot more information now. Again, our universities and our community colleges and technical colleges stepped up. They really helped the hospitals who were short on PPE, doctors and nurses. Our University of Kansas Medical Center assisted there as well, as people were still trying to figure out the best way to treat those with severe infections. I really believe that our universities should be commended because I think the quick response to this virus saved the lives of many Kansans. The shift to virtual learning was the right decision in the spring of 2020, but our universities are also eager to resume face-to-face instruction as soon as we are able to do so safely. I might let you know that we're encouraged that some faculty now are being vaccinated, but our faculty were unlike K-12 teachers, and they didn't qualify in the early phases to be vaccinated. In June, we began gathering cost estimates for the reopening of the campuses to develop plans for delivering instruction in the fall. We're grateful that we received Sparks money from the state of Kansas, the federal dollars, to help us open in the fall. And on page 5 of my testimony, I just included a chart really to provide a national landscape of how many universities were in a total face-to-face format, how many universities were doing some blended learning and partially face-to-face. And on page 6 of the testimony, I included really where we were in the fall as well in terms of a snapshot of our universities and how we were doing in terms of in-person learning and hybrid delivery and distance delivery. Now, here's what I would tell you about these charts. I can only tell you from the standpoint of our system. It is one snapshot. So as the community health infection rates changed, courses began to transition both back and forth. So that's just one snapshot in time, and I know our individual university leaders will let you know for their individual campuses. I know there's interest in that. I also wanted to clarify to the committee, as we receive federal dollars, those federal dollars have a purpose. And you cannot use federal dollars for anything that you want to once you receive them. Well, what I would say, you can do that, but you will be paying those dollars back. And so those all have a purpose, and there is an incredible amount of time spent tracking those dollars and how they're used. You know, we all want to get back to face-to-face, full instruction, just like it was in that delivery before the pandemic. You know, it's one thing to have online instruction, as we've had for a number of years at all of our universities, that's purposeful and built that way. It's harder to do remote learning where you're trying to really simulate a face-to-face environment for our students. We know that many of our students, we know this, they prefer face-to-face instruction. They prefer the interaction of a campus. They prefer fraternity and sorority life. They prefer those kinds of activities that bring them together in community. You know, the board has worked hard to support our universities with policies. I outlined some of those on page 3, because we're going to have some shift here as we respond to this pandemic and as we right-size our institutions for the future. We've created a tuition and fees policy. We've changed that to allow students who have an outstanding balance to continue to enroll, knowing that the pandemic affected everyone. We've allowed auxiliary enterprises like the residence halls. Those have been standalone entities. We've allowed support for those to keep them going throughout this pandemic. And probably one that I've heard about the most, we've allowed university leaders the flexibility to reduce their staffs as we move forward and look forward on our enrollments and right-size our institutions and our operating budgets to meet those enrollment demands and to be aligned with those enrollment demands. So again, thank you once again for providing our higher education system a chance to address you today. We look forward to I look forward to the university leaders coming forward and explaining what they did on their individual campuses.
All right, thank you, President Flanders. And actually, that was less than 10 minutes, so I commend you on your comments. Committee, what we're going to do is we're going to have all the presidents and the chancellor of the University of Kansas have the ability to address the committee, and then we'll open it up to questions. So when you have a question, please identify who you'd like to have that question addressed to. So right now, I know we are having President Tisa Mason with Fort Hays State University. She is virtual this morning, and so I would have the first comment from the president of Fort Hays State University. So, President Mason.
There we go.
All right, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I plan on being brief as well. Well, Chair Waymaster and members of the committee, for the record, I'm Tisa Mason, President of Fort Hays State University. Joining me today is our Vice President for Administration and Finance, Mike Barnett, and our Vice President for Academic Affairs, Jill Arnsdorf. I want to thank you for allowing us the flexibility to testify remotely. It helped us to save a sizable amount of money in travel expense. Fort Hays State University became a pioneer in distance education more than 20 years ago because we understand the challenges of rural communities. Today, we are the largest online provider in Kansas and have recently been recognized as only one of 6 universities in the world to earn the United States Distance Learning Association's rigorous 91-point certification. Important to this discussion is understanding that at Fort Hays State University, in any given semester, our on-campus students also take online campus classes. For example, in the fall of 2019, 42% of our on-campus students were also enrolled in at least one online class. In the spring of 2020, when COVID-19 hit, 51% of our on-campus students were already enrolled in at least one online course. Our detailed written testimony regarding our academic approach can be found on page 2 if you want to see how we approached our on-campus face-to-face, our hybrid, our online, and our traditional virtual classes. And for the spring, if you'll reference page 3, we also have an outline of those courses. I want you to know that following the completion of summer and fall classes, we studied the grades of our students, and we found that the grade distribution for undergraduate courses from summer 2019 to summer 2020, as well as fall 2019 to fall 2020, remained consistent. A summary of our COVID-19 expenditures can be found on page 5 of my written testimony. In rounds 1 through 3 of the coronavirus relief funding, we received approximately $5.2 million. $1.3 million was aid sent directly to our highest need students. The balance was used for various additional costs, such as testing, sanitizing, quarantining, and isolation. The 4th round of allocation of approximately $6 million has been awarded. Of that, we plan to award approximately $2.8 million to our highest need students. We are waiting for guidance on the potential use of the remaining funds. So that's a quick summary to supplement the written testimony. And I am more than happy, along with my colleagues, to answer your questions directly.
All right, thank you, President Mason, and we'll have the questions after all of the other presidents and the chancellor has a chance to address the committee. All right, committee, the next individual that I will call is Dr. Scott, the president of Pittsburg State University. Welcome to committee, Dr. Scott.
Wow, Blake. Good morning. Yesterday was my 2nd week anniversary of my 2nd shot, so I'm feeling pretty good today. Shirley, you're a little safer than you might have been otherwise. So, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Chair of the subcommittee, Chair Humphreys, appreciate the opportunity to visit you today. And really, I'm here to tell a really good story, and it may be surprising to you. And I appreciate Blake going back and talking about what happened a year ago. And the journey we've been on has been exceptional. It's been extraordinary. But I'm here today representing 800 employees, 6,000 students, to talk about the journey that actually, in many ways, was successful. Yes, we had loss along the way. We had many challenges. But we also navigated it, I'd say, in a way that I'm very proud of. When the virus hit a year ago right now, we defined 3 goals. And those were, we were going to take care of our faculty and staff in terms of their safety, and their health. Number two, we were going to communicate constantly our decisions and the rationales for our decisions. And number three, we were going to focus on ensuring our students made progress towards degrees. And I know in the earlier testimony of this committee, that was a topic of particular concern, and Representative Rogers asked me about that during the subcommittee hearing as well. And that was the primary focus of ours, those three things, but ensuring our students made progress was essential. I would say that the story I'm about to tell really is a story of an institution that wasn't cowed by the virus. We figured out how to live with the virus. And I think that's an important distinction. We really did lean into it. And what I'd like to do today is share with you some of the information, some of the steps we took, but more importantly, the metrics that demonstrate the kind of success we had. First of all, as Blake mentioned, as we pivoted last March, we did send students out of our residence halls, and we immediately refunded $1.4 million. We also awarded $2.7 million in federal grants to students who were financially harmed by the virus. Most of those students were Pell-eligible students, but we also allowed other students to make application for an additional grant. Students who might have lost a job because of the virus, students who had their hours cut, students who bought a laptop. Believe it or not, we had a student who had purchased a cadaver for a human dissection lab, and so didn't get to use the cadaver the entire time. We had a choice. We could send back the cadaver to the student, or we could refund them partially what that costs. A little bit of pandemic humor there. A little bit, I will note. So then as we began the fall and spring semester, I think that's so important what President Flanders said, we just learned more and more and more as we passed through this journey. So as we started the fall and spring semesters, on our course schedule that's online, we denoted every single course that was online, a hybrid course, a HyFlex course, or fully in person. So when our students enroll for the fall and when they re-enroll for the spring, they knew exactly what they were getting. We thought that was extremely important. 56% of our courses were offered face-to-face or in person in the fall and again in the spring. Another 20% had in-person elements to them, either partially through the week or week to week. And we thought that was important. We did not shorten the semester in the fall. We did not shorten the semester in the spring, and I think that's important to note. In the coming 2 to 3 weeks, we will administer another $2.7 million to students who are financially harmed by the virus. So when you think about these students paying tuition and receiving the instruction that they receive from us, and in many ways are being held harmless on the financial side, any kind of loss that they might have sustained. So how have we done? Well, in the fall, we graduated 549 students, and we had commencement ceremonies. How about that? This spring, we'll graduate 1,000, and we'll have commencement ceremonies as well. We reviewed retention data, and you'll probably hear this from other individuals, and President Mason referenced GPAs that they did some comparisons on. Our retention data from fall 19 or fall 20 to spring 21 remained unchanged. So our students must have been satisfied they came back. Our GPAs, we looked at fall 19 students who were with us in fall of 20, and the GPA comparison went from 3.16 average across that group to 3.20. So again, learning continued, learning occurred. We looked at pass rates, nursing exams. We're still 5 to 7 points above the national average, just where we've been over time. Teacher education licensing exams, our students passed at the same rates they've always passed at. We looked at CPA exams, no difference. We looked at clinical psychology exams, no difference. So we really tried to really dig into this and see, were our students harmed on the learning side? We don't believe they were. We believe because of our efforts, they continued to make progress for degree and build the skills and the knowledge they needed to build. What do our employers think? Well, we've had career fairs, we had teacher interview day recently. Our employers continue to have a great interest in our students. They're showing up in the same kinds of numbers they've shown up before, and that's essential. We want our students to walk across that stage and walk into a great job and begin a great career. Well, you know that sports are important in our Division II campuses, and I think they're important in all of our campuses and our communities. We actually played football last fall. We played 4 games. We figured out how to do that. There's 160-some teams at the Division II level that play football. Only 11 played at least 1 game. One Saturday, we were the only Division II team playing in America. We figured it out. Right now, I happen to be the chair of the MIAA conference. That's our athletic conference, and several of the folks you'll hear from today are members of that conference. We scheduled 616 men's and women's basketball games. We played them all. We had a postseason tournament. We figured it out. We tested over 4,500 student athletes, athletic trainers, coaches. We had less than a 1% infection rate. Our student athletes were so compliant with the protocols. We asked them to follow the mitigation strategies. It really was pretty amazing. So you just think about those we think those are really good measures of us getting it done, responding to the virus, and doing so in a way that helped our students move forward, and not only our students, but our community. You know, I read in the paper, I see online that we've got to get these kids back in school. Crawford County, they've been in school. I think USD 250, they had less than 16% of their students took remote option. They've missed several days this spring or this winter for snow. They didn't miss any days for the virus. So you just think about, as you think about from your perspective here or from maybe a metropolitan perspective, what you think might have been happening across the state, it didn't necessarily happen the same in every community. And I think in Pittsburgh and Crawford County, we've been very fortunate to make things work. I think you also know that not only do we care about what happens within the footprint of the campus, but we care deeply what happens within our community. So our decisions really are calibrated based on not only how they impact our students, but how do they impact local businesses. So for us to not get underway in the fall would have been devastating to the local business community. For us to pull back in the spring and start late or do something different would have been devastating to the local business community. We didn't do that. Instead, all the way back in April, one of our individuals, one of our leadership team members, became the co-chair of the Crawford County Recovery Task Force. And it was not the Crawford County Pandemic Task Force. It wasn't the Crawford County Go to Your Basement Task Force. It was about economic recovery. And we co-led that effort. So how did we do? Well, the unemployment rate in Crawford County right now is 3.5%. The sales tax collection in 20 versus 2019, 5% above. That's pretty amazing, really, if you think about it. Sure, there was big dips in March, but because we got underway, because we worked on economic recovery, we really rebounded pretty quickly. 6 new restaurants were opened in downtown Pittsburgh in the fall of 19 with our Block 22 project and some things around it. That was a terrible time to open a restaurant. Guess what? They're all still in business. I think that's important, and I think the university has something to do with that. Our Small Business Development Center has helped almost 300 businesses, and 600-700 employees have their job stabilized because of our efforts to help them acquire PPP money. That's been essential as well. And yesterday, because of a great partnership with the Community Health Center of Southeast Kansas, we vaccinated 450 employees on our campus. I think we might be the first institution to be able to pull that off, and really proud of that, because that gets us lined up for in-person, open this thing up fully this summer and fall. Pretty excited about that. So with that, you think about that story, and I feel really strongly about the story. It's a good story, and with all the challenges and a worldwide pandemic to respond to, it was a little surprising when the governor recommended a 5.5% reduction in our allocation. It wasn't a punch in the gut, but it was pretty close. And that's how our faculty and staff would see that. I don't think that's where we need to go. I think we need to invest in higher education. Secondly, the governor recommended a sweeping over $700,000 from dollars we've been carrying forward for our Polymer Center and also for our really successful construction program. That's hurtful. Just after that was announced, we got a $1.6 million federal grant that needed a $400,000 match. That match is gone. And Senator Moran helped us get that. And I'm telling you, that piece is worrisome to us, that lapse funding. I did not mention that at the hearing. Chair Humphreys is exactly right. because I spoke about the broader impact of the reduction and the kinds of things we're getting done. But my silence on that, I don't want to be misinterpreted as we're okay with it. We're not okay with it. It's hurtful to our budget. So with that, I do appreciate the time to tell this story and to talk about Pittsburg State University and express my deep appreciation to the people on the campus, the support of the regents, and really the funding that the state of Kansas provides to us. We couldn't do it without you, and we'd ask for your support going forward. And I look forward to answering questions in a few minutes.
All right, thank you for being here, Dr. Scott. The next president that I'll call is President Myers, president of Kansas State University. Welcome to committee.
Well, thank you, Chairman Waymaster. Appreciate it, and all committee members, thank you for this opportunity. Of course, I'm Dick Myers, president of Kansas State University. We appreciate the opportunity to testify today to talk about this last year that we went through, and I would say that the efforts, at least from my perspective, on our campus were heroic to keep faculty, staff, students, and the communities we live in safe from the pandemic. It was, I think, unprecedented in every respect. I've been through a lot. This was a lot different than anything I'd ever been through before. But while that was last year, I think we all look forward to brighter days ahead. And you can kind of see it. I'm down at the basketball tournament, the Big 12 basketball tournament, and the mood seems pretty good down there in the city and in the arena. You remember it was 1 year ago today, basically, that we shut down, told students not to come back for after spring break. It was this day, Thursday. Let me talk about spring 20 semester. We did not stop offering courses this past year. We weren't closed, and nor were any curriculum or classes discontinued in summer 20, fall 20, or spring 21, which we're in now, of course. In spring 20, the university did suspend classes for 1 week, so we asked the students were on spring break, which was fortunate, and the pandemic was just starting to spread, and the thought of bringing them back from around the world, virtually, that the spread in the community would have been, could have been pretty bad. So we said, don't come back, and we gave faculty and staff a week to transition to a virtual format, and that's before we understood the virus real well. So spring 20 was fully remote teaching for the remainder of that particular semester. At the KU Vet College, they did the same thing, and their spring 20 semester was virtual. Of course, in any medical school, veterinary school, you have a lot of clinical stuff you have to do. You have to do hands-on work. So you'll see here in just a minute where they changed their modalities as we went into the fall of 20. In the fall of 20, we made those plans in early summer for fall of 20, and we announced on June 9th, 2020, the following steps. The fall semester would start 1 week early. Courses would be taught using a hybrid format, which may mean some in person, some virtual, some all in person, some in person and virtual, and then some that were all virtual. Seating was limited in face-to-face classes due to capacity limits to adhere to federal, state, and local health guidance. In addition, we were still in the process of assessing our classrooms and redoing some of the HVAC systems where the airflow was not up to standards for the pandemic that we were experiencing. All those classes went through up to Thanksgiving. They got a Thanksgiving break, and then we asked everybody to stay away from campus after Thanksgiving break. There were 2 weeks there. The first week is what we call Dead Week, which is study for finals, and the second week is finals week. So we figured those two could be virtual while most of that semester was done in those hybrid modes or virtually, as I said. The Veterinary Medical College on July 22nd notified students their courses would be delivered face-to-face in the fall. And every veterinary student was provided with a hands-on opportunities they would receive in a normal school year. Very important for their graduation. I taught last fall. I taught in a hybrid course. We were in a classroom that could accommodate all our students. I co-teach with another professor, obviously. We never had more than 5 students in the classroom because the other 25 preferred to be at home, actually. It was their choice. It was a hybrid. They could come in and maybe they didn't want to risk spreading the virus, maybe they, for whatever reason, but they stayed home. They all could have been in person. We also wanted to have some, if students weren't satisfied with the instructional modalities in their various classes, they had through the third week of that semester, the fall of 20, to withdraw from classes and receive full refund. So if after 3 weeks they weren't happy about one thing or the other, they could withdraw and would get a full refund for all their fees and tuition and so forth. Furthermore, this system was designed to be very flexible because as we went through last year, we had students that would come down with the virus and had to be isolated. We did that on campus, and they could do it off campus if they wanted to. And then we had some through contact tracing that would quarantine. We had rooms set aside on campus, and of course they could do that off campus as well. So by providing online instruction in the hybrid mode, they never missed any class. They might be in quarantine in an apartment somewhere or in one of our residence halls we had set aside for this, but they could continue their classes and then go back to the face-to-face once they were released from quarantine or they were released from isolation. So flexibility was really important to us and give the students lots of choices. The spring 21 semester, plans were made early in the fall for last fall for the spring classes, and we announced on September 11th, 2020, the following steps. The spring semester would start 1 week later than planned. I think it was July 25th or January 25th when we started. Courses would be taught in the same formats we were using before, a hybrid format, including remote, hybrid, and face-to-face in person. Seating was still limited in some of our classrooms that didn't qualify under the air handling standards for the pandemic. And there would be no spring break. So we took the spring break out of it. That's why we started 1 week later. They're going to finish on the same calendar date they would have finished on by starting 1 week late. We took out spring break. They still start on the same, and they get all the instruction they would have gotten if there had been a spring break in there. The students did ask for a wellness day. They said, we want 1 day during the spring, and they negotiated that with Faculty Senate and Student Government Association. A long negotiation, but the students asked for and were granted a 1-day suspension of classes for a single day spring break, a wellness day as they called it, and it will coincide with a weekend, a Monday, or I believe. The veterinary medical college students were notified October 22nd the semester would remain the same as the fall 20, so they were in that same modality of in-person, face-to-face. In terms of facilities, we evaluated over 750 classrooms, both on Manhattan campus in Salina and Olathe. We evaluated these classrooms, as I mentioned before, around the air handling needs. To accommodate face-to-face classes, we taught classes in places we normally don't teach them. The Student Union, don't giggle at this, the Sheep and Meat Goat Center, and even Weber Arena, which has a dirt floor. But they were large enough and had the right air handling capability to be able to have classes in those locations. The facilities staff deployed 10,000 signs across the campuses, installed 400 electric static sprayers in classroom, countless bottles of sanitizer, and thousands of bundles of paper towel. And then, of course, through all this period, as we got some of the federal money, we started to improve the technology to allow for the online instruction, because a lot of classes were never meant to be taught online, and they had to transition to that, and they had to have the technology to back that up. As you know, state funding accounts for 45% of the university's general use budget, and it's a key component for us to continue to operate and fulfill our instruction, research, and service mission as a state land-grant university. We incurred about $96 million in lost revenue or other fees during the pandemic. And that's the projection through the end of this fiscal year. We, as you can tell in the written testimony that I submitted, there's some of the things we did, the budget levers we pulled to make sure we could live within our means as they were adjusted. So one of the big deals we did was administrative furloughs, and that affected over 1,400 faculty and staff. All the senior leadership took voluntary salary reductions to include in athletics, so the athletic director, all the coaches. We eliminated vacant student employee positions. This is hard because a lot of students need those positions to earn the money to pay the tuition, pay the books for the books, and pay for their housing. And then we had layoffs as well, terminations and layoffs. So fairly dramatic, I think, for our campus. I will say one thing. We have refinanced some of our bonds to get a better interest rate, did that in January. Moody's had to give us a rating on our credit worthiness, and we got the same rating in January as we had pre-COVID, which I think, given all that went on, was pretty good. So pulling these budget levers when we did, I think, enabled us to stay in a position financially that was where we want to be. You'll also see on page 5 of the written testimony that we show where we use the COVID-19 funds. All of that had to be, as I think been already mentioned, all had to have some direct relationship to the impact that COVID had on our campus. You can see the numbers there. It was a godsend, frankly. We could not have kept the campus open if we didn't have that money. So let me just close, Chairman Waremaster, members of the committee, with several key points. K-State was never a COVID super spreader site, to include athletics, by the way. We conducted all that safely, never designated, never, and the county Riley County was watching us closely in Manhattan to see if it would become a super spreader event. Even our flight training program in Salina, for those that have been in flight training programs, you got an instructor and you got a student. You sit side by side, and the instructor's job is to yell at the student, and the student's job is to listen to the instructor, and you can't do it with a mask on. So it's we've kept that program going, and very proud of that. They tested not as regularly as athletic teams, but they tested very regularly so they could do that. Last academic year, we graduated over 5,600 students. So despite the pandemic, over 5,600 students, 95% of them either had jobs or were going on to higher education, 96%. 70% stay in the state of Kansas or the Kansas City metro area. And the average salary, it was the same as it has been for some time now, for a couple of years anyway, at $50,000 a year starting salary. It varies depending on your degree, but $50,000, which has been in the past, I don't know how it is particularly this day, but it's higher than the average salary for Kansans between 18 and 65. So there was real value in the pandemic. Students got real value. They graduated, and they're out being good citizens and supporting most of them supporting us here in the state of Kansas or nearby. So my hats are off to our faculty, staff, and students. It wasn't easy. A lot of people don't like the online piece. We all get that. There are a lot of faculty that don't like it. They do not like it. Some don't like to teach that way at all. But we did what we had to do to keep our campuses safe, get our students an education, and it was, I'll go back to my first words I said earlier, it was really a heroic effort by many because it just was so unnatural for them. And at the same time, they had their own worries about their own health and their family's health and K through 12 and on it goes. But it was, I think, a really heroic effort to do what we did in this last academic year, continuing in this spring. So I thank you for the opportunity to be before you today, Chairman.
All right, thank you, President Myers, and I just want to congratulate K-State for your win last night, and then I hope that you knock off Baylor this afternoon.
I mean, so they go home, and it's less than 24 hours, and they're out there against one of the best teams in the country. We'll see. I hope to be there if we.
I'll be cheering for you.
Okay,
so.
Well, we'd like to do that. Anyway, great. Thank you all.
And then also I was informed that actually today is Sue Peterson's birthday. Is that correct?
It is.
What a great way to spend your birthday in the Appropriations Committee. So thank you for being here.
You have 2 March babies. Well, it's hard to call us babies, but it's 2 March babies here. So.
All right. Thank you, President Myers. All right. The next president I'm going to call is Dr. Farley with Washburn University. Dr. Farley, welcome to committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for permitting me to come and be with you today. I am excited to share with you what you have heard from other presidents as well. I hope that you are as proud as I am of my campus and that you are of all the presidents that you will hear from today. We've done a heck of a job to address all of the challenges that came about because of the virus. 1 year ago, you'll hear this today, I'm sure, many times. 1 year ago was the introduction of the virus to the pandemic world. And it became apparent that this was not going to go away quickly or easily. Our students last year at this time were on spring break. And of all the complaints and all of the discussions and all of the adulation that students have passed along to me, the most difficult decision we've made, and the one that was probably as concerning as any, was we had to eliminate spring break this year. Okay? We'll catch up. We're a teaching institution. That's our mission. And we work diligently to find the best way for our students to learn in this strange new environment that we find ourselves. Our goal last spring and continues to be today is to find ways for students to continue to pursue their education goals, whether to graduate immediately or as soon as possible or to continue their coursework. Changes to academic policies were made in order to make it a little more give students a little more flexibility during this time of great stress for them, and it is really stressful. I'm proud to say that faculty, staff, and students have embraced our Latin motto, non nobis solum. Non nobis solum. It means not for ourselves alone. And the actions that all on campus took demonstrated how important that is to us. The only semester had any diminution of the number of times that students met in class, had any shortened time, was in the spring of 2020, and that was the first week of the virus when we were open. The rules about what are required are set by federal government and by higher education accrediting bodies. And we meet all of those rules. We want to make certain that the students are prepared for graduation and for the work in their profession following graduation. One of the most difficult things we had to do was to restructure our campus so that we had the physical separation that was required. And we had to change each classroom on the university to be outfitted with the technology and to enable them to enable us to stream material, to use Zoom at the same time, much like you're doing here. Even in-person classes, students, including those who are in quarantine and faculty who are in quarantine, were able to join remotely. Students make that decision whether they wanted to come to the class or not. 2 weeks ago when we had the snow and ice storm, I can just imagine there's some students in the residence hall or in their apartments around campus that woke up, kind of stretched a little bit, looked outside and went over and turned on their computer rather than going to walk across town to their campus. This has been incredibly challenging for our faculty and for the entire campus because they had to convert their courses to be taught in new and really unique modalities, new modalities and formats. The workload to do that is nearly double, a little more than double it is to follow the normal traditional kinds of technology and how we have taught for years. While most students are anxious to return to the traditional college life, there are some students, as you might imagine, that flourished in this new modality because work, family, or simply because they did better in that non-classroom kind of environment. We're planning for this coming fall to be similar to the traditional campus experience that you remember and that we and students like to have. Now, there'll be some enhancements to that because we learned some things of the way we can do some things in the classroom. And that will be incorporated into the fall classes that we have. We've already announced that it's our intention to be back into face-to-face teaching this fall. There have been opportunities to learn new technology and ways of teaching, and that'll serve us well into the future. Washburn never closed. Many worked from home. I came to my office every single day because it was simply more convenient for me to do that. I felt better about it. But the campus was eerily quiet, eerily vacant. Last week, as I was leaving my office, I passed a lot of students on the sidewalks. Wow, students on the sidewalks. That was incredible. I wanted to hug them, but of course you can't do that. I got to the parking lot and there were cars in the parking lot. Wow. It seems to me that we may be moving back to the more traditional environment, and we look forward to it. Thanks for the opportunity to be here with you.
All right. Thank you for being here, Dr. Farley. The next president I'll be calling is the interim president for Wichita State University, Dr. Mumma. Welcome to committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today and talk to you more about Wichita State. And I think one of the first things I'd like to just point out is, even though we just come through a pandemic, still going through a pandemic, WSU has come out really strong, and we're continuing to focus on our priorities, and that's one of the things I'd like to leave with you is that. So I want to first talk about some of those items, and then I'll talk about our COVID response. So as you know, WSU aspires to be one of the nation's most innovative urban public research universities, where we provide educational access and help our community and state solve some of the most pressing issues. And I'd like to briefly discuss some of those and point some of those items out. Then you have our PowerPoint presentation that you can follow along. If you look at page 2, first I want to point out a recent study that we did about our economic impact, and released our first in recent times a study that demonstrated that WSU is an economic driver of Sedgwick County, but also the region and the state. And as seen on slide 2, you'll see that Wichita State's total economic contribution to Kansas was an increase in jobs that amounted to almost $500 million in labor income, but overall just under $1 billion in economic activity. And although the largest portion of that was Sedgwick County, nearly 25% of it was spread across the remainder of the state. If you turn to slide 5, WSU continues to strive and focus on 3 things: providing affordable education, increasing the student experience, supporting businesses in a talent pipeline, and then increasing the overall economic prosperity of our community. In terms of affordability, if you look at slides 7 and 8, you can see how our costs compare to other public research universities in the area. Slide 7 shows how we compare in the state, and slide 8 shows how we compare in the region. However, none of this is helpful if we cannot reverse the demographic trends in our state and the declining population in our state and enroll students. To help with this, and if you look at slide 13, 2 things are essential to help reverse some of these trends: bring in more talent, and the other is to support business growth, and we're laser focused on this. To assist in bringing in more students to Wichita and Kansas and address our declining population and the problem of not having enough individuals to fulfill critical jobs to build our economy, we are continuing to grow our I-35 corridor approach to recruiting students. And if you look at slide 13, we have focused on recruiting along the corridor, up and down the corridor, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Houston, where we have businesses in common, to recruit new students to fill these critical areas of the workforce in our local and regional economy. And so far, we've increased that recruitment effort and brought in nearly 1,000 students, new students to Wichita State into our area over the last 5 years. And 70% of those undergraduate students, they stay in Kansas after they graduate. And this is all while we are increasing enrollment by about 7.4% over the last 5 years. In terms of supporting business growth, we are very focused on growing and developing new academic programming in areas of workforce and industry demand, and we have studied this extensively, and we're focused on growing our engineering workforce, of course. If you look at slide 15, there's no coincidence why Wichita ranks number 3 among metro areas for the highest concentration of engineers per 1,000 employees. This has been reinforced by the investment of the state that they made 10 years ago by passing the University Engineering Initiative Act. But we know we need to do more, and we've been using our other resources that we have, that we've accumulated. And I'm looking on slide 16 and looking at growing and diversifying into other areas. And as you know, there's a data revolution currently happening in many of our industries, including manufacturing, which Wichita is heavily focused on. Everything from advances in connectivity, sensorization, computing, and automation. The COVID pandemic has amplified the need for this. And this is all changing the fundamental economics of how we do business, meaning this is of local interest. This is also important to Wichita, given our city's manufacturing base. So we're working on creating a digital ecosystem to include the health sciences, and this is where we've been making a lot of progress. If you look at slide 17, provides a timeline of where we are in terms of developing this digital ecosystem. And on slide 19 and 20, you'll see the current focus on educating students in this new ecosystem, which we need to grow the talent pipeline in this area. In terms of increasing economic prosperity in our community, we're focused on growing our industry-based research. We surpassed $160 million in funded research this past year, and the number is $169 million, and a significant portion of that is with our industry partners, helping them solve some of their most pressing issues. And if you look at slide 22, you'll notice that we're bringing in new businesses to Wichita State University, and you'll notice that NetApp and Deloitte are developing a presence on our campus, which will help to provide applied learning opportunities for our students and grow and provide research and provide expertise to businesses as they innovate. Standing up the COVID-19 testing facility, which you all are benefiting from, keeping the Capitol open, was an added priority this past year and meant to help businesses, in particular, to help them keep them open and safe. And slide 23 through 27 describe that activity. We've tested well over 100,000 specimens since we opened the lab in October. On slide 30, you'll see we have added several other businesses to our campus, and we're now working with our faculty and students, giving our students added applied learning experiences, which also aids in their employment opportunities upon graduation. All of this is meant to grow our funded research, as seen on slide 32, and where you'll see we're projected to reach over or close to $200 million in funded research by fiscal year 2023. So that's just a little bit of background of where we are as an institution. And now I'll switch to how we've responded to COVID. And if you look on slide 33, and the pivot to remote learning that we were forced into this past spring, we made sure our students were notified of our courses and how they were being offered, so they knew what to expect before enrollment started this last summer and fall and now this spring. And we'll continue to notify them going forward as needed. We're hoping to have a more normal offering of classes this fall. If you look on slide 34, you'll see that we're currently offering 3 types of courses: a hybrid course, which is primarily an in-person offering with some online content. We're also offering a hybrid online course, which is online content with in-person exams, and then fully online for those who choose that. Students who were forced to transition to online due to the pandemic were not charged any additional fees, and we have no plans to do that in the future. And our transition to remote learning was done only after a stay-at-home order was issued in the county and in the state. If you look on slide 35, in terms of refunds, we refunded unused housing, meal charges, and parking, and adjusted the last day to drop a course for the last day of the semester to give students more flexibility to make a decision on whether to receive a grade or not. In terms of our CARES Act dollars and how we use those, they've helped Wichita State stay safe, accessible, and affordable. And you can see on slide 36, spending nearly half of it, over $10 million, of our HERF 1 and 2 funding on emergency aid for students, and over $5 million has been spent on IT and other health and safety measures from our Sparks funding. Slide 37 shows various budgetary actions we have made to fill revenue shortfalls, and financially as an institution, we're sitting pretty good given where we started with the pandemic and why we've adapted to the pandemic. This, along with several years of additional budgetary actions, have helped us adapt to the new reality of less public resources. So in closing, I'm going to summarize on slide 38. Besides our own internal reallocations and resources and budget cuts that we've made, to help the state and help our university. We've also made significant progress with state investment in growing our engineering workforce, and therefore we're asking that you continue to have conversations with us about continuing to have providing greater access to students into the higher education system, but also to think about and focus on how we could grow our engineering workforce, and we so much appreciate any kind of consideration of extending the University Engineering Initiative Act to 2032, but also as we pivot and diversify to invest in digital transformation. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
All right, thank you, President Mooman. And I want to commend you on going through your provided document in 9 minutes. That was impressive. So thank you for being here. The next individual that I'll be calling is the Chancellor from the University of Kansas and the Kansas University Medical Center, Dr. Girod. Welcome, committee.
Thank you, Chair Waymaster, and thank you, committee members, for giving myself and my colleagues the opportunity to meet with you today and give you an update on how our universities have addressed the challenges of the last year, almost exactly a year since all this started, and impacted us so significantly. So I'm going to try not to repeat too much of what my colleagues have shared with you. I know you're hearing a lot of similar themes across our universities. We actually worked very closely together through the regents with weekly phone calls, sometimes bi-weekly phone calls, to share information and share planning, and that was extremely valuable, I think, for all of us. So I'd like to talk, and you've got some slides there. Rick, I didn't match 38 slides, so we've got to, we'll get through it well. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about how we prioritized our students through the pandemic, and then I know there were some questions about how we invested our resources and what sort of losses we were looking at, and then we'll follow up with, end up with some thoughts about state funding. Similar to my colleagues, we very quickly in March made the shift while our students were headed off to spring break to move to a more remote format for the spring. Really took the time to do that, and our number one priority really was to focus on the spring, which was to make sure that our students did not lose their progress for the rest of that semester, that our students or seniors would still be able to graduate, and that our senior professional students would be able to finish their studies as well and get to graduation that spring. And so it was all hands on deck to do that, and to do that in essentially 2 weeks was really a monumental undertaking on everybody's part to do that. And really did it with the thought that we knew that our students were going to be in many places and they're going to have many challenges. So we tried to create as much flexibility around that as we could, including amending our grading policy so students could choose to go to credit, non-credit. We extended the deadlines for withdrawals for classes for students. Actually did that twice over the course of the spring. Fulfilled course adaptations, so students who needed special accommodations, we were able to do that. We did also, as our colleagues did, do partial refunds, prorated refunds for housing, for parking, for dining for those that were graduating, and credit for those who were not. And then really very efficiently and quickly, as our colleagues did, distributed the federal dollars that came to us for students themselves, and we're able to get that out the door pretty quickly to help them with their financial challenges, which many obviously did experience. So we also made the decision for the summer to stay online. Actually, most of our summer courses are online anyway, so that wasn't that big of a shift for us. But we really spent the summer focusing on fall and what fall would look like and how we were going to be able to get our students back on campus in some form, but in a very safe fashion, and how we were going to go into it with an attitude that we needed to meet our students wherever they were. We knew some would not be able to make it back to Kansas. We had about 40% of our students come from the other 49 states and 110 countries. We knew they would not be able to make sure we could accommodate them. And we also knew that some of our students would need to go into isolation and quarantine, and we didn't want that to disrupt their education. So we ended up with a course offering, and this is really you should have this handout. This really is what we sent to the students before they enrolled. So they would understand when they went through our course catalog exactly what it was that they were signing up for. And it's really what we built our curriculum off of, and we have some 3,500 courses. So it was not a minor undertaking to do that. But we really thought it was important to be transparent with the students so they knew what it was they were choosing to study over the course of this current year. And like others, we braced for the national predictions of a 20% drop in enrollment. Gratefully, we did not see that. We saw about a 2.8% drop in enrollment in the fall and just a little bit more into the spring. So we were pleased with that, and we feel like that validated the efforts that we'd made to meet the students where they were as we opened up for the fall. We also, in the spring, really shut down the majority of our research enterprise, and that's a very big part of what we do. We bring in about $265 million a year in research funding, and that employs 4,000 people. And so it was important for us to get that back up and running again as well, because those federal dollars don't come unless you're actually doing the research. So starting in June, we were able to open our research enterprise back up again. I would just throw a quick caveat that I should have at the beginning. Most of what I'm talking about is really the Lawrence Edwards campus. The medical center actually is very technologically driven, has 3 campuses in Kansas City, Wichita, and Salina, and they're very technology driven and hybrid in format normally. So there was not much of a disruption for them at all through this process. So it was important that we got that research back up and running, and much of that research actually was focused around COVID and shifted to that and proved to be very beneficial as well. From the finance side, I know that was a question of this committee. We really, as a result of all this, as you've heard from my colleagues, really encountered historic budget shortfalls as a result of this, and really on the revenue side, about a $72 million revenue shortfall for current year. And that was housing, dining, events, parking, athletics, kind of across the board. Every one of our revenue streams took a pretty significant challenge through this. At the same time, it was very expensive to keep our campuses open again. We spent over $44 million doing that, get open again. We've addressed the shortfalls through a number of things. Some is cost avoidance, because we also were not doing a number of things that we normally do, but we've done furloughs and layoffs, salary freeze, hiring freeze. Executive team took a salary reduction starting last April, and university-wide we did for 6 months of the current year. We did initiate a voluntary separation program, a retirement program to reduce headcount, if you will, and a number of different administrative efficiencies, and really worked across the board to do what we could do to accommodate that without really changing what we're providing to our students from a service perspective. We know that this next year looks to be very similar in some of the financial challenges that are compounded by what's happening with the pandemic, and so we are working very hard towards addressing the issues for next year as well. From a federal funding standpoint, we've received about $44 million so far in federal dollars. I don't need to tell this group that those dollars come highly restricted in what you can use them for. You cannot use them to backfill those lost revenues. You have to use them for new expenses, but we needed it for those new expenses. Over $8 million of that went directly to students, and the other $36 million we spent really on the expenses of getting the campus open with PPE, with testing. We've tested over 75,000 people so far, or people several times actually, through the course of this, and all the remote technology and everything else that we needed to do this. That money also needed to be largely be spent by December 31st, and so we have accommodated that and been able to do that in a way, and the accounting that goes behind that. If you've ever dealt with the federal government, you know that you're going to get audited, and you better be able to show what you did with those resources, and we've done that as well. We know that there is more money coming. We don't have great guidance about what that looks like. The initial guidance is it's going to be similar to, in terms of restrictions, similar to what we've seen to date, but we're still waiting on to see what that looks like for the next round of funding. If you look at the slide that has the pie chart there, it just shows our funding sources for the university. with 18% from the state appropriations and 24% from tuition. And I really highlight those two pieces of the pie because those are really the funds that we use to run our educational enterprise. All those other slices of the pie, whether it's grants, or it's donations, it's services that we sell and provide, those resources have to pay for themselves. Those are all self-sustaining organizations and really don't help fund our core educational enterprise. So that's why the state portion of that is so incredibly important. And I'll just finish with my last slide, which is a slide that, in this case, the actual numbers are KU, but if you took the numbers off, it would look the same for higher education, that we're still, in current year, we're still below the 2008 funding levels. And the governor's proposed reduction, which would be the largest dollar reduction that we've seen in recent memory, certainly would add a significant challenge to those challenges that we already have from a revenue perspective. So that's why really the ask from KBOR coming forward this year was really flat funding if possible, just so we don't cause a bigger magnitude challenge than we've already seen financially across the institutions. I would say I think our college campuses proved to be some of the safest places in the state of Kansas over the course of the pandemic. And the number of our students and our faculty and staff that have ended up hospitalized or seriously challenged with their health is incredibly low compared to the rest of the population. And I think we should all take great pride in that. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions with the rest of the group.
All right. Thank you for being here, Chancellor Girod. The last president that I have that's going to be addressing the committee is the president from Emporia State University, President Garrett. Welcome to committee.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of you for your time and your interest in higher education in Kansas. I'm sure you've heard from my colleagues that as you go back to spring break of last year, things were very uncertain. And at Emporia State, we were making the decision about whether, as our students return from spring break, we should pivot to our classes being entirely online. We did begin offering in-person classes again last summer. Most of our classes during the summer typically are online, but as early as last summer, we were already offering some of our classes in a face-to-face mode again. Both for the fall of this past year and the spring that we are in today, about 3/4 of the Emporia State classes that were scheduled to be offered in person were offered in person. The remainder of those classes were offered in a hybrid format, for some generally due to room capacity issues, or in a few instances moved to entirely online to accommodate faculty health concerns. Of course, we also gave students the opportunity to have their health concerns addressed by studying online as well. One of the questions that was provided to us was whether we charge a fee for online instruction. And we do have a fairly modest fee of $30 per course at Emporia State for online instruction. But for courses that shifted to online that were not originally intended to be online, we did not charge that fee. We also refunded room and board to all of our students last spring when we ended in-person instruction early. In Lyon County, we continue under a 45-person limit for gatherings, although that may change today. And at Emporia State, we have been successful in working closely with our county to assure that certain kinds of activities where a larger number of people is necessary can continue, things like baseball and basketball, with the appropriate protocols to ensure the safety of those in attendance. I'd like to just mention as well, briefly, regarding enrollment. We were hit maybe a little less than some other institutions last fall in terms of an enrollment shift. We were down by 49 noses, or 0.8% in our head count. We actually would have been up, but for the fact that we've had 2 straight years of all-time records in the number of graduates at Emporia State. For this spring, we're comparing ourselves to last spring, and of course enrollment last spring, when it occurred, was unaffected by COVID initially, and we're down by 2 students this spring. With respect to funding, Emporia State has been very fortunate to have received a good deal of funding from the federal government, from the state government, and from our county as well. Much of that funding has gone to support our students some of it in the form of refunds. We immediately refunded room and board last spring, and were gratified then later that we were able to use a portion of our federal relief money to basically reimburse ourselves for that refund to our students. We also made emergency aid available to students and have been pleased that we've been able to support our students in that way. Other expenses are the kinds of expenses you've probably heard my colleagues talking about. A lot of investment has been made into the technology that enabled that pivot to online instruction. And even today, while we are mostly in person for classes that were scheduled to be in person, the flexibility required by faculty is enormous. You may be a faculty member who is teaching an in-person course, but you also have students who throughout the semester may be drifting in and out of in-person instruction because they might be quarantined or isolated. So faculty members have, throughout this process, gone to enormous lengths to support our students by being flexible and able to teach not only the in-person courses, but also provide the online instruction for those students who may be unable to attend in person for a time period. With newer funding that is, we think, headed our way, we hope that we will be able to address some of the revenue lost over this last year. I think some of the nuances of that remain to be seen, but we are hopeful that that will be the case. That concludes my report. I'm happy to stand for any questions you may have.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Garrett, for being here. And I want to commend all of the presidents and the chancellor of the University of Kansas for getting through their testimony by 10:15. That was my goal. And so I want to commend all of you, because I know you all could talk about your particular universities for hours on end. So I want to commend all of you for the brevity of your comments today so we can get into the questions that a lot of the committee members have. And actually, the first question that I'm going to ask is going to be towards President Flanders. Obviously, the idea of having this conversation today with the regents and the regent universities was precipitated when Chairperson Humphreys brought forth the budgets for all the universities and the Board of Regents, and there was an amendment that was voted on in this committee in regards to reimbursement to students if they would happen to participate in remote learning. And so I would just ask President Flanders if there has been any analysis on how much that would cost the Board of Regents and system-wide for the regent universities in that particular amendment.
Yeah, so specifically for the amendment, I know that each institution on their campus, and it might vary depending on, you know, how many students came forward. I believe just at one campus, I think at the university, if you just took the University of Kansas, and the chancellor could speak to this, it'd be between 80 and 90 million. So if you think, if you just do that multiplier, I'd expect we'd be well north of 150 million. I appreciate the amendment. I'd like
30-some sessions or 28 sessions because I'm of the age where I would be a high-risk individual. Now today, with two shots on my arm, I'd go in person. The person that I teamed with was relatively young, and she was happy to be in the classroom. And we followed when we were in the classroom, we were masked, we were distanced, we'd sanitize before and after. It was probably pretty safe, but I didn't want to take a risk for just 5 students. If 30 of them showed up, that'd been great, but they didn't. They were happy to be in bed. You could tell they were in a relaxed study mode when they were attending class. I'll just say that. Not all of them, but some of them were appearing right in there. And that's, you don't expect that to kind of happen. But it was a combination of things. But basically, our chief academician was the gatekeeper on how those went.
President Mumwa.
So similar kinds of things happen that have been described already on our campus. We had a team that had 7 different teams on reopening the campus, and one of the teams was charged with curriculum, and it was managed by the provost office and our associate vice president. Had to be reviewed and signed off by the provost and the dean and the department chair. There was cases where there was some switching at the last minute due to issues with faculty members who weren't able to do any in-person kinds of teaching. You'll see in our numbers that Dr. Flanders provided that we had like 87% hybrid. That doesn't really tell the full picture. At any given time, 40% of our students were on campus doing in-person activities.
Okay, thank you. I think I do have another comment, but the Chancellor wanted to comment again.
Chancellor Girod.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up. I don't want to leave the impression that this was perfect by any stretch of the imagination. We did this very quickly. We've perfected it. We've learned a lot. We are getting better at it. But the reality is pandemics are not fun. And there was no way to do this gracefully. Our #1 priority is to make sure our students stayed on track. And it was not always graceful, and it was not always technically perfect. And I think it really has brought home to us the importance of what we do in a normal environment and how important that is to our students. And that's why we were working very hard to get back to that in the fall. But to your point, it was not perfect.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to make a few comments. Number one, I appreciate that because anybody that has students that are in the universities understands how much of time they lost of that socialization and being in the classroom and that person-to-person contact. So I appreciate that, and I hope that moving forward, we will always provide an in-person experience option for our students so that our campuses can be vital and moving and that interaction can be there. I also wanted to commend the Chancellor for the really tough position you took on the tenure aspect and the policy and the changes that you made. I only wish that the other schools would have rallied together because we need to think about the fiscal strength of our universities in tough times, and that was a tough decision, and I'm sorry you had to stand alone on that. And then the only other comment I would make, Mr. Chairman, is being a parent, I would love for our universities to release the credits for food and other things that are just racking up on their accounts, because many of them are never going to go back to meal plans at dorms or other things like that. And I noticed that some universities released that and some universities did not release that. And that's thousands of dollars for each student. So I would just ask that you consider that. Thank you.
Representative Humphreys.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much all for being here. I think my question is for President Flanders. But I'll say it, and then you can kind of figure out. We know there's so many moving parts to all of this, and it's a little bit of what Representative Williams asked, was how did you make the decisions to do exactly what you did? And I think in the spring, none of us knew what COVID was really going to look like, and really strict guidelines made tons of sense. And then as we've gone on, we've seen some of the not so positive outcomes for the students. And of course, that's what I think you're here for, is because of the amendment got your attention. And so I think that's what I want to direct my question to, is what did you learn about how to do online, remote, in-person, and what is the plan for the fall? Specifically, I hear that, oh, there was a class and none of the students came. Do we really think that's because they didn't feel safe? Some of them, yes. But we know that there were parties going on all over every single campus. And so I remember being in college, and if we had had the opportunity to be in my dorm room, sitting in bed, with all my friends, I might have taken that option too. So my question is, how is there going to be a little more accountability with the students? I mean, is there going to be, are we going to go back to, you have to be here in person if you're taking an in-person class, unless you have a waiver, unless you've spoken to the the professor about this instead of just opening it up to, hey, we're doing hybrid, we're doing in person, we're not, you can come, you cannot. I'd like to know the accountability for that. And then also, what have you learned through this? Like how, if this happens again, what might we do different, specifically thinking of the student outcomes?
President Flanders.
Sure. Thank you, Representative Humphreys, for those questions. You know, when we initially made the decision to move to more of a remote format, I would like to tell you that was really scientific, and it just was not. We had limited information. We tried to do what is best. We had board members that say, we're not going to be doing this. And then as we had a call and started talking about the information, it was like the same board members a month later said, well, we need to restrict travel in all of Kansas. So, I mean, it really was changing. You know, what we've learned, I guess what my biggest takeaway is, the face-to-face format is not going away. In fact, it's preferred by many of our traditional students. And I've had legislators say, well, now that it's online, do you need any buildings? We're going to need buildings. We're going to need buildings for research. We need facility renewal. The buildings are going to need to look different. Those 300-seat lecture classes might be able to be electronically delivered because there's not as much contact, you know, with a student maybe while the professor's teaching. But our learning spaces are probably going to need to look different in that many of them are going to be more teams-oriented, more interactive. We've really had a movement, COVID's probably been an accelerator of moving from recalling information that a professor as a sage on the stage gave you to now needing to use that information and taking all that information and applying it. Wichita State University, as an example, has an applied learning model. You know, you have to do that face-to-face and hands-on. And I would tell you that skipping class is not something new. You know, so when I was in college, I went to every class. But there were some of those rogues. There were some of those folks that did not. You know, the student is an adult. One of the hard issues in the transition into college is how are you going to manage your time and how are you going to do that without a parent there pushing you to go? That's really part of the learning process and part of the process of how someone becomes a good employee. You know, most employees, honestly, many do not get let go because they're not as competent as they need to be. But if work starts at 8 o'clock and you're there at 8:10 every day, you're going to be at risk. And so, you know, I don't have an easy answer for the accountability piece. I'm sure that one way to do that when you're teaching is you just give a quiz every day at the beginning of class. You know, that puts an accountability in. But, you know, I think our university presidents could probably address some of that as well, how they believe it's going to happen on their individual campus. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Representative Estes.
Thank you all for being here and having a candid conversation. So on one end of the spectrum, there's the kids who are enjoying skipping. And on the other end of the spectrum, I've had a few students come to me and say, when I get my degree in X, I want to make sure that I'm able to do my job well. And some classes that didn't get to be held in person, they feel, yeah, they put a check mark by the class, they have a grade, but they don't feel 100% on the knowledge that they're supposed to have. Are you guys open to some kind of an option for these students where they can audit the class in person? The professor doesn't have to grade. They get to come in, they get to it's a second bite at the interaction that they're missing. I just really want us to find some solutions that help students.
Representative Estes, who's your question directed to?
Anybody who wants to say yes.
All right, President Muma.
So we actually asked the Board of Regents to give us approval to allow auditing for students who are just in that situation who felt like they needed to go back and learn the content without having to pay additional tuition. So that's available for us to, all of us to get approval from the board. So we did that, and some students took us up on it. Not a lot, but some did.
Thank you.
President Garrett.
We would also be interested in that approach. In fact, we already use something very similar with respect to graduates of the Teachers College, and that we guarantee our graduates so that if they are employed in a school district without the skills needed to be successful, we remediate, or in rare instances, once or twice in many, many years, actually refund the first year of pay for that teacher. So I like the idea of making classes available for students who really want to assure they received the education they were paying for.
Any other administrator that wishes to address the question? President Myers, you good?
No, I think we all reflect the same sentiment.
All right. Representative Rajas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And since all the presidents are here and online, let's go to class. No, I'm just kidding. We don't even go about, maybe I had a premonition of COVID 30-some years ago, and I got an early start on what others experienced. I don't know. That's a whole other story as well. You know, over the last year, we learned a lot. And the last couple of days, we really kind of gained a vision of being a Monday morning quarterback on not only higher education, but everything, K-12, business, everything else. And you know, my kids are, well, I have one still left in technical school, and that has brought us challenges. And so I guess that's where I want to start. And I would say either Chancellor Girod or President Myers, you know, to talk about those interactive classes, you know, those labs. You know, we ought to take biology, chemistry, so on. When those went virtual, I mean, how were those labs conducted? How were those, you know, I mean, because that's a significant fee to have that lab class. So what happened there? Is that, you know, what did the student, what did those that paid that tuition, you know, I'm just trying to piece that all together, those labs. How does that work towards degree completion?
President Myers first.
Dr. Rod said earlier, not perfectly, but we did conduct them. And so I'll give you an example of a human anatomy class where generally you're in there working with a cadaver. They had to do that virtually. There were people online and they were looking at it virtually. Is that as good as hands-on? No, it's not as good. Is it adequate? Probably. Is it what we had to do in the emergency? Yes. And so to graduate them. But that's, I think, the innovation that we saw from a lot of our professors and our instructors and our graduate teaching assistants was remarkable. They tried to make that as live as they could. And a lot of those were the ones that would be the in-person classes too, as long as we had the space to be able to do that safely. Remember, we had to be 6 foot distance and all these sorts of things that you had to do. I mentioned the veterinary college, they realized after the end of the spring semester, they had to go back on and do it all in person, and they did. So, but it was just a lot of innovation, and I give you one example. That's the one I'm really familiar with, actually.
Chancellor Girod.
I always defer to a 5-star general. You know, we had to do it virtually in the spring. We worked hard over the summer to think about fall. We made some major very expensive investments in platforms that do online laboratory teaching. And I mean, you can get a Holden chemistry degree online if you want. That's out there, and there's a lot of, not from us, but that's out there. And we had to leverage some of those technologies that already existed out there to do that. I would concur. I personally don't believe that's as good or the same thing. And so really, even by spring semester, the vast majority of those, we've gone back to figure out how to do that in person. I would just maybe comment on one of the questions earlier as well. We actually, we learned through the fall, you asked what we learned. What we learned is accountability is an issue. And so we did for spring semester, if a professor was teaching an in-class or in-person class, they could require attendance because they were super frustrated trying to teach an in-person class with nobody in the room. And so we allowed them to go back to requiring attendance. And then if a student needed an accommodation because they had to go in isolation or something, we had a way to do that. But we allowed them to go back to that because we just, it just wasn't worth doing it in person unless we could do that. And so they asked for that and we agreed.
Representative Rogers.
I have two kind of quick ones, and I'm not sure exactly who this should go to, and maybe Dr. Flanders, but or if somebody, especially those that did a lot of online, that aren't used to it. So I guess Dr. Mason, you're off the hook. But the integrity of test taking. You know, you hear anecdotal things of maybe you know, proxies weren't there, and can you address that? How do we know that those tests that the students took, you know, had that integrity because they were proxied?
Dr. Flanders.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Rogers. You know, early on as we moved into that format, again, wasn't perfect. So, you know, you do rely on an integrity of a student and taking those exams. Recently, we've just contracted with a couple of firms that provide monitoring that you can do that online. And so we feel like we're much better in the go forward. You know, I think if I'm trying to communicate anything here is that our response to the pandemic, we did as well as we could with the information we have.
In-person commencements this spring, and we'll be making that announcement. I just checked my phone. It hasn't come out yet, so you're getting a scoop. But that announcement will go out this morning. And we have already announced that our plans for the fall involve a pretty normal fall. Again, as my colleagues have said, if the pandemic cooperates with us.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Farley. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't follow the chairman's orders, and I think I went out of the right rotation. So,
well, who's in trouble, me or you?
Hard to tell. Probably me.
Yeah, probably me. We're going to have graduation ceremonies that look more like what we've done in the past. We're about 71, 72% face-to-face, but you have to recognize that in even those face-to-face classes, there will be days when the faculty member will use technology in that class to get more information across. And we refer to that in one venue, we refer to that as a hybrid type course. We have about 18% of truly asynchronous online courses, but they are in very specific disciplines, Masters of Nursing, respiratory therapy, radiation therapy. All of those lend themselves totally to being an asynchronous mode. And we'll continue those. We haven't grown that number in several years, so I don't think we're out there trying to do it now. But then there are some others that are just kind of dogs and cats running around that are not asynchronous, and they're not going to be really true person to person, but very small number of those.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Dr. Moreau. Muma, is that, did I say that right? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Muma, that's the name.
Yeah.
So thank you for the question. It's really difficult to me to hear your experience with your son not choosing Wichita State because of his experience on campus. I'd like to hear more about that, maybe offline. Just to remind, I said this earlier, that at any given time, 40% of our students are currently in person, and we've spread it out over the whole week. And so I don't know what the time of the week that experience happened. And also, Wichita State is a little bit different. We're an urban school. We're in a community that has a lot of community spread, and we are following the orders of our county health officer and trying to do the best we can to make sure that we keep the campus safe, and we really have to mirror what's going on in the county. But having said that, well, one thing I want to also say is that the plans for spring, I'm assuming you all were there this spring, were planned last fall when we were at the height of the pandemic. So those plans were already in place and hard to reverse after the fact. But going forward, and we just announced this week, like a lot of the other institutions, that we are going to have an in-person primarily experience starting in the fall. We feel pretty confident that we'll be in a good place with that, given the fact that the vaccine has become fairly widespread now in Sedgwick County and the surrounding counties. So again, apologize for that experience that he had, but that's where we are with our plans.
All right, I don't think I missed anybody. Yeah, Representative Tarwater.
Okay, I just have one more question, and first I do also want to commend Dr. Girard on taking advantage of what the Regents allowed to terminate tenured professors. And, you know, we heard a lot today about the governor's cuts to the programs, and I would suggest to the other schools that they may look that direction to try to save those monies. And if I was in Dr. Scott's shoes, I certainly would find a way to find the $400,000 that would draw down the extra $1.6 million from the federal government, rather than worry about the cuts. I would, as a business person, I would take advantage of the program that the Regents put out there. But my question is kind of along some financial lines to Dr. Flanders. One of the biggest issues that we're seeing or hearing about, and it is very expensive for the universities, is the fact that our students that are graduating from K through 12 are, most of them, I would say about 80% of them is what I'm hearing, are not prepared to go to college or go to work. So my question is, how many of these students that end up in your lap, how many of them are not prepared, and what is it costing the universities? Because I think we're going to have to find a way to charge K-12 for that. That might be a way to find some dollars for the universities.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We know the impact is there's going to be an impact on the students that are coming to the universities in terms of preparation. We've heard that some K-12 students did really well in the online format. We probably likely, I think the commissioner would say this, that most prefer, and there's a better delivery with the face-to-face format. If you look at ACT, so these aren't my numbers, these are just from the ACT. They have tests that generally in 4 areas, you know, you might math, reading, and I think right now, if I remember the last year of data, and I'll get this to you, I think about 23% of the graduating seniors, those are the ones that graduate that also took the ACT, were prepared in 4 areas at the post-secondary level. So this isn't a new issue. This is an ongoing issue. We also know that we prepare all of the instructors for K-12. So we're in a partnership with K-12. This isn't about, well, you need to give us better material so that we can have an easier time teaching. We know we're in a partnership. We want to partner in that way. Most of the remediation is actually done at our community colleges. So many times if a student, you know, needs to go to the community college first to prepare for the university, most of the remediation is done there. The universities cannot use state general fund to finance that remediation, but there still is many labs and experiences for students that aren't prepared for that college level work. I can pull together some numbers for you, Representative Harwater, and just look and see what that bill would be. And I expect this, I'm very positive about our outlook, but I do expect this to be in the snake's belly for quite some time. We know that if students aren't reading at grade level at the second or third grade, it's really hard to get them up to grade level throughout their experience. We need to do more to make sure that the junior and senior year at high school start blending with the freshman and sophomore year of college. So what does that look like? But we will put together some numbers in terms of the cost of remediation. The cost, there's some indirect cost as well. So one cost might be your time to degree. So we're hyper-focused as a Board of Regents on tuition. And we spend 2 meetings on tuition. We have a first read and a second read, and we really look at, we haven't raised tuition really for the last couple of years. But tuition is not the big cost driver. The big cost driver is time to degree. If you spend 1 extra year getting that degree with all those related expenses and then take those opportunity costs of not being in the labor market, it's expensive. And so if someone comes in and is not prepared and their time to degree is going to be 6 years instead of 5 years or 5 years instead of 4 years, there is a significant cost. We'll pull those numbers together for you. I appreciate the question.
That's all I have. Thank you very much.
I did have one follow-up, Chair, if I could.
All right, President Flanders.
So on a broad-based system plan for face-to-face instruction, I think you heard from the universities that many of them are planning to go face-to-face instruction in the fall. I've been hesitant about bringing that type of policy to the board level and say, here's what we're going to do in every community across the state of Kansas, because they're just not created equal. Some community, the virus has affected the communities differently at different times. So I was born and raised on a farm and ranch north of Goodland, Kansas. When we first went to remote learning, you know, I call out there and they say, we're just not going to participate in the pandemic. Well, there's only 80 people in the entire town, you know. Now, I will tell you, it made its way out there through travel. But initially, they didn't have any community spread for a number of months. So if we have a university in a community that there's no community spread, it might look different. If we get these variants and this thing, we have another wave, then we're going to have to, what we learned from the pandemic is we've got to be nimble. So I don't want to box this into any one model, but our desire is to be face-to-face, to be operating that way. So,
Representative Hoffman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think, Blake, you brought this up, and a couple of questions. I don't necessarily need from each one of the presidents, but you'd mentioned the audit courses or allowing them to go back and take courses again if they feel like they didn't have what they wanted. Are all the universities going to offer that, or was that just one of the universities offering that?
So we've allowed that. I don't know the number that are participating. I know that some are. So I would defer to the president.
They're all kind of shaking it. Yeah. Pretty well everybody's going to offer that. So you're going to offer, they'll be able to retake a class without charge the next semester.
President Mumma, if you could come up to the mic so people listening online can hear.
What we asked the Board of Regents to approve last time we looked at our tuition fees in May was for 1 year they have the ability to come back and request to audit a course.
Okay. Well, I would certainly encourage all of the universities to look at that. I hope you will. I think that's one way to give the students back a little bit of what the amendment actually was talking about. The other question or comment question, I guess, kind of goes back to, I know that we, you know, when we're in the middle of a pandemic, things don't always, we're kind of in a crisis. I hope that as we exit this pandemic, that not necessarily on the board level, but each university looks at what maybe puts together some sort of a committee. You know, of course, here in the legislature, we love committees, but put together some sort of a committee that looks at what worked, what didn't work, and going forward, because I do believe that we do have some advantages as we go forward with some online learning. I look back at my particular, remember my freshman year, and that 7:30, 500 person, I think it was chemistry class, was not the most favorite for me to get up for, and unlike President Flanders, I don't think I made every one of them, and you know, and so I do see those large classes, those large lecture classes. I do think that there are some that would probably prefer being online, but I also think that there's also that growing up, as one of you mentioned, in making yourself actually get up and, you know, and go to them too. So I hope you'll look at that, and I appreciate what you've done. I know it hasn't been perfect, and so that, I guess, is more of a comment than a question. So thank you.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. You know, mine will be more of a comment, and someone could make a comment about my comment if they wish to. I think you all know in this room that I work at the University of Kansas. I'm a faculty and a staff member, and we have covered part of this. But what I heard were choices that were made. You looked at it, you could be online, you could be hybrid, you could be in person. I personally know that many of our students on campus consulted with their parents as to which of those choices they should make, because parents were paying most of their expenses in many cases. I also work directly with students on campus, not only just in the classroom, but at the Dole Institute of Politics, we have over 100 students on the Student Advisory Board. They continue to meet every 3 weeks to check on students, to see how they were doing, how their classes were, what kind of help they might need, and everything else. So there were lots of other things going on. Something I did not hear that I think is really important is that for meals, especially at Mrs. E's in our dining halls, they could actually go into the dining hall, social distance, wear their mask, or they could just come in, get their meals, leave, and go back to their rooms. So they were offering, you know, those kinds of options. But most importantly, what I want to just talk about was when I asked the students how they were doing, and that's my job, to find out how they're doing. Many of them enjoyed their online courses. Some of them did not like their online courses. Some of them did get up and go to class. Some didn't get up to go to class. But one of the things I learned in student affairs is that in loco parentis, and in loco parentis meant it used to be universities were in lieu of parents. That's in loco parentis. We don't really do that anymore. They're adults, they come, and they have to make their own choices. It wasn't a good situation that we were all thrown into. But when I asked the students, and I sent an email out on Monday, of 100 students that responded, 75 said their experience was positive and sometimes painful. They learned a lot. They know now not to play around with the virus, but that they felt that they were a concern for the university. And that's all I really wanted to repeat. They were positive about it. They were scared, and they missed their grandparents, but they were positive. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to, we have a great talent pool assembled here, and I'm thankful to have you all working in Kansas. Several of you have heard me harp on my old saw, which is mission, and focus on that mission. And the mission statements sometimes are useful, but even in a time of crisis, if there's clarity around that, it can help guide us. And I would suggest that perhaps some may need more clarity in exactly what we do and in what we do together, as was mentioned, even with K-12, to make sure that we are actually able to execute, because it makes it hard to measure against what when there is a lack of clarity on that. And I might push it a little further, and my question will be if you have any painful success stories of what you don't do in general, not necessarily due to the pandemic, but other pieces in that as I finished with my schooling, I had an opportunity to pick up golf with a lot of colleagues who suggested it would be very valuable to a financial career, or pick up flying, which was useful to get back to Kansas. And I chose that I didn't want to be bad. I could afford to be bad at golf, but I didn't think it was a good choice to be bad at flying. And that's where I'm trying to get towards the mission. So a couple of things that I might ask, if there's any clarity that helped through the pandemic, to Chancellor Girard, I have heard you ask those hard questions different times, and I've been really encouraged by that, to say what do we do really well and what do we not do. And then I might start with President Muma, if you're willing, only because I was really excited about it's an evolving world that you are at the leading edge of, right? So how do we continue to meet those needs? And I was excited about the National Institute for Digital Transformation. But as I move something like that up, how do I manage the shelf space at Wichita State to have that in the right place and recognize that I may not have the luxury of expanding to be able to do that? So excited about that, but is there anything that shifts around to make space for that? And I want to commend you for looking at and thinking of those next things that are there. And thank
President
you.
Muma.
Thank you for the question and comments. One of the things that Wichita State's been doing over the last 10 years is really right-sizing to our new reality of higher education. It's changing so much. We talked about in-person and other kinds of activities, but there's so much technology now that's available for us to innovate. And one of the things that we're focusing on is trying to diversify into the digital ecosystem, that space. And so working with the faculty and our local industry partners to help them innovate, we have really made a big dent in that. And it's required that we've reallocated and shifted resources around from programs that aren't as needed as they were once upon a time. And that's really helped. There's no, there should be no reason why anybody would think that we haven't been working on that, because we don't have any programs that really have low enrollment, because we've gotten rid of those or combined them with other areas and then taken those resources and shifted them into this development of this digital ecosystem. Our community is rallying around that. It's desperately needed in Wichita. I've been at the university for 25 years. We've been talking about diversification for many, many years away from aviation, not excluding aviation. But this is something that's really is taken hold, and it requires us to do things differently, and that's what we've been doing.
Ms. Johnson, did you have any other individuals specifically you wanted to answer your question?
If anyone has anything, and they may be hard even to talk about because they're hard decisions, so it may not be fun to address, but I'd welcome any other suggestions.
Dr. Flanders.
Yeah, I would like to just quickly say the board is having this same conversation and actually developing policy. And I've been in front of this committee before, and I'd ask you this again. As we make these hard decisions on staffing, on programs, on knocking down buildings, every building, every program, every lab area has a constituency. And it could be a little noisy. The easy thing to do is to cut everybody 4% and 5% every year. And you just continue to weaken the entire body. But these decisions, they're currently being made right now. They're being made in policy. The board is looking at a facilities renewal policy that's going to change the way that we address not only deferred maintenance, but how we move forward with a different facility footprint that aligns. We're doing it with programs. And I would just tell you, it's tough work. And so I hear from policymakers, legislators, sometimes they say, hey, I hope you won't cut that program. You know, there has to be something reduced. So I just thank you for your partnership.
Any others wishing to address that particular question? Dr. Scott.
Just very briefly, our mission statement is to provide transformational experiences for our students and our community. And you can hear that in my comments. So I think that's really important that we were centered and we focused on our core values and what we're to be about. The lesson I learned, the negative one, is don't mess with commencement. It's going to be the title of my memoirs. In 2011, we won a national championship and we moved commencement off the national championship date. That was not well received. In May, we couldn't hold commencement. We didn't know enough about the virus. Now I wish we had just done a parade down Broadway and thrown diplomas at people, because those families, and this is relevant to everything we do, those families and those individuals who are graduating, it is one of the most important days of their lives. And when you mess with that, you have affected the entire experience at that university. And I think that's relevant today in this discussion, because it reminds us all of what an important experience we provide for our students. So we're going to do commencement somehow, some way, because of that. Thanks for that question.
Dr. Garrett.
Thank you. And Representative Johnson, thank you for your question. You may recall a couple of years ago we talked about how Emporia State is looking at new programs. And let me begin by saying that when we're looking at creating new programs, the first source of funding is existing programs. Cutting things that are no longer productive and using that funding then to do things that are better. And when we look at new programs at Emporia State, even our faculty now are accustomed to working with our finance department to create spreadsheets. They have an idea of what their burn rate's going to be. When does the program that they're proposing turn cash flow positive, if it does? That's been very, very helpful. It, to some extent, took me and took our provost out of the business of saying no, because if someone does their work with our finance department, creates their spreadsheets and realizes that the program will be a money loser, then they usually don't bring it forward. So that's been really helpful for us. And over the last few years, we've cut 11 different programs, 10% of our faculty and staff, to be able to do some of those newer things.
Any others? All right, not seeing any. Representative Helgerson.
I'll make it very brief. Dr. Flanders, you have a... How are you going to respond if I told you that after we go through COVID, and COVID is basically a test to our system, as much as it's damaged things, killed people, it is a test to our educational system. How will you respond if I say that when all the money shakes out from the feds, that we are at the high level of our funding for the Regents institutions from now on? I say that because I look at what the document that KU provided, and I think that's probably fairly accurate. I don't see us going much. In fact, when I look at the body here, I don't see us putting in a lot of money. I champion what was said about having to close certain programs. But I also fear that what happens in the championing of new programs, that we are championing those programs because that's where the new money is. That's the business that's giving $500,000 or $1 million for a new building. And so since the state has changed its commitment from what it was to what it is now and what it will be in the future, how do we guarantee, and this is really the crux of the issue, how does the Board of Regents and how do I know that I'm going to have confidence that you're going to say, KU, you're going to be the premier university, and it's going to have the cream of the dollars, as much as I may like Wichita State or somebody else, but these are the core programs. And I'm not going to try to equalize K-State, there you are, because K-State is going to be a different purpose. Because what I've seen after 25 years is we try to equalize. KU, well, if KU gets this, then Wichita State should get this, and K-State should get, you know, and what we end up doing is not giving enough money to you. But in looking through the future of higher education document, and I've just had a chance because I've gone through it, you don't deal, or these people, one that's sitting here with us, you don't deal with the biggest question, and that is, you're great at raising funds privately. You do a fantastic job, better than anybody else. And the state will never equal up to its share. So with the limited resources that are out there, and with the money that's out there bringing you to, in Wichita State's case, go to the newest program for economic development or for some business that we're trying to lure into Wichita, but we eliminate other programs that are key. And that's what I need the regents to start focusing on, is make the tough decisions with the limited dollars and fully explain that in the future. Because we're all going to be canceling programs or embracing the new programs together. And that's sometimes that we're lacking. Now, you can comment or you can just say, yeah, that was a nice rattle.
Yeah, so I would like to comment.
That's fine, go ahead.
You know, so interesting, the way this was set up, this is hard work. I mean, the board has already taken those steps. And this issue of the funding's at the high water mark, you know, and the funding from the state has been decreasing for a number of years. And so this isn't something new to our universities. Obviously, it's gotten tougher, but we're going to be operating 100 years from now. And we're going to still be delivering a great product to Kansas. We are. We're going to figure it. There has been tremendous innovation on that. Sometime, to your point, not always good. Because if the dollars aren't there for something new, you say, well, I'm afraid a program is getting put in because there's resource behind it. That is probably, there's some truth to that. So how do we balance those loss leaders? How do we continue to deliver, I'll call them loss leaders, and have a balance in a revenue portfolio that can make sense? I would tell you that nursing programs across Kansas are a loss leader. No one makes money on nursing programs, but many institutions deliver them because those communities need it. So you try to cross-subsidize with other programs. Now, I would tell you the way that you have set this up as policymakers, and it's fair, we talked about this at the Future Council. Is the footprint too large? I'll just put it out there. Do we have too many institutions? Who needs to close? Okay? Do you know we can't close an institution? You have to. So it has to be in partnership. If we think an institution needs to go away and we need to narrow our footprint even further, but I will tell you this. I believe that an institution can be smaller and still incredibly high quality. It is no problem to have 5,000 students at an institution delivering unless your budget is set for 7,500 students. So I think we can still do a great job. We are going to narrow our footprint. The regents, our regent meetings, there's been a lot of difficult conversations and more to follow.
All right, thank you. I am not seeing any further questions, so I would just like to commend first all of the presidents and the chancellor for being here this morning. When we had the discussion in regards to the budgets for higher education, I made the promise then that we were going to have all of you to address the committee as well as the Board of Regents to discuss the many facets that is involved with the university system and the Board of Regents statewide. So I want to thank all of you for being here, making time. Obviously, I guess if we can talk about the elements of COVID-19 and us being pro forma and our on our House session this morning, we had the opportunity to go beyond our regular scheduled time, so we did not have to condense any of the comments or the questions or comments that was made, so we could actually have a great discussion in regards to the Board of Regents and also the universities as a whole. And I want to commend all the committee members as well for your candor and your questions, comments for the universities. I really do appreciate it. There's many people who asked me how I was going to wrangle everybody and as far as making comments and everything. And I want to thank, again, the administrators, Board of Regents, and then also the committee members as a whole as well. So thank you very much. Committee, we are not scheduled to have a committee meeting tomorrow or Monday. So as of right now, we are adjourned until 9 a.m. on Tuesday morning.